Hello, welcome to my house. I'm Tim Burbage, this is Tim Burbage Reads, and I'm hopefully uploading this on my birthday. So I will be 36 years old, done 36 trips around the sun. So what I'm going to do to celebrate that, the fact that I'm old, is go through the 36 years of my life on this planet and pick out a book that I have read that has been published in every year, like my favourite book from that year. Some of them were difficult choices because there were lots of options. Some of them were difficult choices because there weren't that many options. But I've also tried to, if I was between two options, I chose one from a different author. But I couldn't manage that every year. But hey, let's start. So, 1988, I read. I'm not going to say in 1988 I didn't read anything in 1988, I was born. But a book from 1988 I read was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Apologies for pronouncing that incorrectly. I remember reading this and enjoying it, but it hasn't really stuck with me that much. It's been a while. So, 1988. 1989 is The Dark Portal by Robin Jarvis. This is the first in the Deptford Mice trilogy, which is a book series that I read as a kid and really liked. Really liked. So read those. In 1990, Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman came out. Very fun book, good TV series. Second series wasn't as good, but that's because there was no source material. Then in 1991, there was The Story of Tracy Beaker by Jacqueline Wilson. Jacqueline Wilson, I met her, she came to my school. She still does live near where my parents live and where I grew up. And I think Tracy Beaker's a great story because it's about foster kids and children lashing out and why they're lashing out, all that kind of thing. In 1992, Terry Pratchett makes another appearance and wrote Small Gods. Now, this is a Discworld book that I remember vividly reading. I read it as a teenager, and I remember the idea of the gods being based off their belief, and these are about gods that have lost all their belief. And I think one of the gods is a turtle and gets picked up by a bird and is about to be dropped. That's about all I can remember. In 1993, Roald Dahl produced My Year. This was the last book he wrote before he died, and I bought it at a really nice edition at the Roald Dahl Museum, where I went to last summer, I believe. And it was meant to come with a calendar. He just writes a page or two about every month, and I really enjoy reading his autobiographical work as well as his, kids fiction. 1994 is The Bellmaker by Brian Jakes. This is of the Redwall series. I loved Redwall as a kid so much. I read so much of it. There's like 20 books, I think, and I read all bar the last 3 because I just grew up by then. I was a teenager by then. But yeah, I remember the cover of The Bellmaker. There's like a mouse, I think, and he's in like a red cloak and he's got like a big gnarled staff. In 1995, Northern Lights by Philip Pullman came out, the first book in his Dark Materials. This is one of only 2 book series that I've ever reread. I read it as a kid, probably a bit later than 95. I probably read it 98, 99, 2000, that kind of time. And then I read it again after I'd finished uni, I think it was. And I think Northern Lights is the best one of the 3. I think Lyra Belacqua is just a fantastic protagonist. Next, in 1996, A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin came out. Everyone knows about this. It's just so good. I read it after I'd watched a few series. I caught the series a bit late because I didn't have the right TV package. And then I watched all the TV series up until that point, maybe season 4 or 5. And then I read the books. So, fantastic books. Winds of Winter, I've made peace that I I think we're on like a 50-50 if Winds of Winter ever comes out. Dream of Spring I don't think will ever come out. Next, 1997 came a small book called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. This, I remember reading it in 97 or 98. Harry was almost the same age as I was. He got teleported into this magical world, and it's such a magical world. I'm reading it to my kids now, and they are loving it. They're finding the prose, the words, quite long. It's quite long-winded, but they're very young. So, but they just find the world incredible. In 1998, a book called Notes from a Big Country by Bill Bryson came out. I think this is the only Bill Bryson book I've read, and I think I read it as a early teens kind of thing, because I found it in my parents' book collection and read it because it had a picture of a Miami Dolphins player on the front. I remember it being quite funny. I would like to read more Bill Bryson. 1999 is Battle Royale by Koushun Takami. Battle Royale, if you like the Hunger Games, you'd like Battle Royale, because Battle Royale did it first. I think Battle Royale, it was such a good book. It's one of my favourite books. And I loved how it spoke. It was mainly about the characters and the plot and everything moving forward, but you got that sense of world building. It was very soft world building. Then in 2000s, I've got my first kind of sequel series repeat. It's Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. This is the biggest book I'd ever read in my life at the time. I raced through it. It's up there for my favourite books. In the Harry Potter series, I think it's really, really good. I love Quidditch World Cup. I love the challenges. It's just so good. 2001 came out. In 2001, Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve came out. This was a book series I only discovered 5-6 years ago, and it's one of my favourite series. It's about municipal Darwinism, where the cities themselves, after there was like they called it like the 100-second war or something like that. There's a big nuclear war and everything's a wasteland, but so the cities mechanise and become mobile, and it's called municipal Darwinism, where you have London is this like huge tank basically and goes around and tries to eat other towns. The book itself is brilliant. You have different viewpoints. Just because you're a main character doesn't mean you're protected. There's views on humanity. There's a main character who is genuinely unlikable at points. I've really, really enjoyed it. I think it still has... The second one's got the most like YA-isms, but that's fine. Really, really enjoyed it. Then 2002, Eragon by Christopher Paolini. So this was a book I read as it came out, and I was like, this is so good. This is really good. I finished the first 4 books when they came out. I read them as they came out. I had the big hardbacks of them. And then afterwards, someone pointed out to me that it is the story of Star Wars, and that it's 100% correct. And that's kind of diminished it for me a bit, but I wouldn't mind going back and rereading them. Or the thing is that Christopher Paolini wrote those when he was very young. He was like 15 or 16 when the first one came out, which is incredible. And he hasn't done like a ton since. He's written like a few short stories, and he's got the new book, Murtagh. I always read it as Murtaugh. I don't know if I want to read it or not. I feel like maybe that's just a thing from my youth that I liked, and that can just stay there. In 2003, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon came out, and I remember reading that pretty close to the time. It was incredibly popular, and really good view on neurodivergence. That term wasn't used, that term didn't exist at the time, I don't really think, but I loved how every chapter was a prime number, and there was a play. I went to see the play, and the play was really, really good. In 2004, Captain Scott by Ranulph Fiennes came out, and this is a wonderful biography of Captain Robert Falcon Scott, because Ranulph Fiennes has done it. He has been to the South Pole and he made it back alive, which Scott didn't manage to do, and he kind of rescued the reputation. And I find that era of exploration incredibly interesting because there was no map, no one knew what was there. Yeah, you just had to go with it, and Scott viewed it. It was Scott versus Amundsen, and the book doesn't really paint Amundsen in a great light, but I think it does a really good job salvaging Scott's reputation. Now we're in 2005, and there's a book called The Traveller by John Twelvehawks. This is a book that I must have read pretty close to when it came out. My mum bought it and I read it, and I kind of changed my worldview a bit. You know, when you get the right book at the right time, and it's a book that spoke about people who can transcend different planes of existence. They often become leaders or prophets, and there is the bad guys, the Tabula, I think they're called, and they're looking to create the Panopticon, which is the prison where everyone feels like they're being watched 100% of the time. So you need less guards because everyone is just feels like they're under constant supervision. So they act like they're under constant supervision. This is about Big Brother. This is about CCTV. This is about your data. This is about companies and governments taking your data without telling you. And this was written in 2005. And it's about them using your data to manipulate your decisions, to accept the fact that they're stealing your data. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, I don't mind being under constant surveillance because I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, it's not about that. That's still a violation of your privacy. Yeah, The Traveller kind of told me to stick to the man a bit. In 2006, then I read The Sign of the Cross by Chris Kuzneski. This is... Da Vinci Code had come out and was hugely successful, and this is like a piss take of the Da Vinci Code. It actually actively takes the mick out of the Da Vinci Code and calls it out, but it's also still a fun action romp with like two ex-Marines. Well, they're not Marines, they're kind of Marines, Air Force, Navy, whatever. Their banter is great, and it's about a treasure hunt for stuff to do with Christ, very much like the Da Vinci Code, but just better. I really enjoy Chris Kuzneski's writing. 2007 was The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. This is a beautiful book. It's a big chonker, but that's because half of it, if not more, is art. Just beautiful pencil art about a boy who lives inside the clock, inside a train station in Paris, and trying to find his father. And there's a bit about early cinematography there. It's a really nice movie as well, directed by, what's his name? Martin Scorsese. 2008, you get The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, the book that launched 1,000 tropes. Man, dystopian was such a flash in the pan, but The Hunger Games is still so good. Similar to Battle Royale, which did come out, was it 9 years earlier? But The Hunger Games, I think, does everything that any of the other dystopian kind of stuff. It did it first, and I think it did it best. I do think the sequel, Catching Fire, is probably my favourite of the series. There's now 4. But yeah, Hunger Games, really, really good. 2009 was The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan, the 5th and final book in the Percy Jackson series. Percy Jackson's my wife's favourite book series. I think The Last Olympian does everything that you need a last book to do. It just really nails it. Yeah. 2010, I read, the book came out, was The Disappearing Spoon by Sam Keane. This is it's a non-fiction book about the different elements in the periodic table. So the disappearing spoon is gallium, because gallium looks just like a gallium spoon would look just like a normal spoon. But if you put it in a cup of tea or a cup of hot soup, it has a very low melting point, so the spoon would melt and it would disappear into your drink. So I remember reading it I thought it was very good. Sam Keane did a really good job of taking complex scientific information and making it digestible and entertaining. 2011. I think I graduated by university by this point, was The Martian by Andy Weir. I can't believe this book is this old. I read this later. I think I found it in a charity shop. It had like the film movie tie-in cover, which is never great, but what a book. Brilliant, hard science, and I would say actually hard engineering. Mark Weir, is that his name? No, Andy Weir's the author. I can't remember what the astronaut's called. But he's an engineer, so his approach to problem solving is really good. Yes, it's a bit juvenile in points, but that's because the main character is a juvenile man. But no, real tension, and just thinking about what you would do. Like, that he just gets left behind on Mars and just has to live for himself. Really, really good. In 2012, there was Wonder by R.J. Palacio. This is the book written for children about a boy who has tremendous facial disfigurements and goes through lots of surgeries. And, you know, I think the iconic picture is him walking into school with an astronaut's helmet on so people don't get to see his face. What I really enjoyed about it wasn't just his perspective of dealing with this, with all the surgeries and the illness and the in and out of hospital, but was how his sister coped with it. He's got an older sister she's trying to work out who she is in relation to herself, not just being the boy's older sister. And I liked how in the film they managed to get that across as well. I really enjoyed that. In 2013, it's another author repeat, and that's The Hunters by Chris Kuznetsky. So this is a separate series, and it's about a group of treasure hunters this book is about the treasure that was put on a train in Romania at the end of the Second World War, went up into kind of what became the USSR and then disappeared. I really enjoyed this series. Again, super fast paced. The characters are all kind of cutouts, but it's kind of heist, where like everyone has their specific job. Oh, you're the hacker. Oh, you're the archaeologist who knows all the history stuff. Oh, you're the guy who's the heavy weapons expert. And they all work together really well as a team. 2014 is As You Wish by Carrie Elwes, the story of the making of The Princess Bride. Princess Bride is one of my favourite films of all time. That will be a film, again, I watched it at the perfect point in my life. I remember watching it with my mum, and she was like, I think you're going to like this. And I was like, what is this? I thought it was The Princess Diaries. I got the two of them confused. But then I was like, hang on, that's the boy from the Wonder Years that I watched as a kid. And that's Columbo from when I watched as a kid. And then that's Mandy Patinkin from Law & Order that I watched with my mum. And that's Carrie Elwes from Robin Hood Men in Tights that I watched with my mum. And then that's Andre the Giant from wrestling that I used to watch. And that's the voice of Rex from Toy Story that I used to watch. That's Christopher Guest from This Is Spinal Tap that I used to watch as a kid. Like, it was just... I'd seen everyone before. It was just like... It was like the Avengers Endgame of my childhood. And so reading the book, which was about the making of it, and the making of it was tremendous as well. It was full of really interesting anecdotes. I think the most important thing was that at the time they made it, Andre the Giant was one of the most famous people on earth. And he had lived such a strange life. Samuel Beckett used to drive him to school. What? You know, just bonkers stuff. How he'd pass out in the hotel, in the bar of the Dorchester, and they couldn't move him because he was so big, so they just put like the ropes around him, and people just had their breakfast in the Dorchester, one of the poshest hotels in London, if not the world, around this 7-foot tall, comatose, snoring giant. Just brilliant. Really, really interesting read. Really good read. Then in 2015, I've got a comic here, which is Captain America Hydra Descent, the all-new Captain America Hydra Ascendance by Rick Remender. This is when Sam Wilson becomes Captain America. I read this within the last few years on the comics app, rest in peace, and I thought it was brilliant. It just shows Sam is constantly, as Captain America, Sam Wilson is constantly fighting racial prejudice, the fact that he's not Steve Rogers, the fact that he doesn't have superpowers, but he still gets up and he still fights, which I really enjoy. And I think Falcon's one of my favourite characters, mainly due to Anthony Mackie's performance in the films. And so, yeah, I thought it was a really, really good comic book of just like the worst day of his life, basically. In 2016, there was Fingers in the Sparkle Jar by Chris Packham. Chris Packham is a naturalist. In Britain, he used to present the Really Wild Show when I was a kid, and present Spring Watch and Winter Watch and things like that. He also is on the autistic spectrum and cares very passionately about animals and doesn't really like people that much. And this is a story of him growing up where he took in a kestrel that had been injured and he raised it. It's like Kes, but like in real life. And the story does have a tragic ending, and you kind of know that going into it because it's set around, there's like a framing narrative of, I think he tried to commit suicide, and it's like him going to counselling or about that. And so I don't know if this memoir was part of that process, but it was so impactful, and just the way it was written was incredibly poetic. This is the difference between an autobiography and a memoir. Just the writing style was so evocative and imaginative, and there was subtext all over the place, and the imagery was so hard to describe, the emotions, the intensity of what he felt in particular times, and the complete lack of intensity at other key moments in his life. Just a brilliant read. I picked that up from a charity shop as well. Then in 2017, mine is Adventures of a Young Naturalist by David Attenborough. David Attenborough is a national treasure. I think he's now an international treasure. He's in his 90s, and any news story involving him sends me into a mild panic attack before I finish reading the headline. But this is about him in the 50s, 60s, producing a TV show for BBC Two, which he would then go on to, for BBC Two, which he was actually running. He was the first commissioner of BBC Two, insane, and he was like 28 or something, and head of a whole TV channel. But no, this is about him creating this. So it's going to 50s, 60s, going and doing exploration. Naturalism, conservation, at that time was capturing animals and bringing them to zoos for education and things like that. So it's about him trying to capture these animals, going to Africa, going to the Amazonian rainforest, and David Attenborough was metal, man. There's a story of where they need to capture this wolf, and he literally just hides outside the cave, and they lure it out, and he just rugby tackles the wolf to the ground and just manually grapples it. Just what, dude? 2018, my book is Fire and Blood, The Story of the Targaryens by George R.R. Martin. This was the book that nobody wanted, but it's then launched House of the Dragon. And it's so good. It's really interesting, the framing of it being a history book, but you still get all of the quality of his writing, and his characters still come through, even though it is just telling you everything. You still get favourite characters, and you see their machinations and their motivations change and shift, and their allegiances shift in this time of civil war in the Targaryen family. 2019, we're in the last 6 years. The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg. I read this last year, and it's about Disneyland meets Westworld. What if the Disney princesses, they're not Disney princesses, but what if the princesses were androids, and then one broke their programming and murdered someone? And it's told through interviews, it's told through case notes of the murder trial, it jumps around in time. It's thrilling, it's interesting. Oh, it's good. It's really, really good. I recommend that. Then in 2020 is Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline. I really liked Ready Player 2. It's very unpopular. It's an unpopular opinion. But one thing I liked about it was that it called Wade out on his stuff from the first book. So in the first book, Wade is the main character, and he's obsessive, and that's viewed as a good thing. He's smarter because he knows more trivia than anyone else, and he does quite a few bad things to people, and never gets called out on it because he wins the day and he wins the story. And in this one, he gets called out on it. Like, he is not a good person. And it's when you have the obsession and the fragile ego of that main character, and then is then given ultimate power within the Oasis and outside the Oasis. What does he do? He acts like you would if you were a really bullied kid and suddenly you got superpowers and you go and take out your bullies. Like, that's how he acts. And it's not a... people are like, oh, he's really bad. He's the bad man. Like, he's meant to be the good guy. He's not. I don't view it that he's meant to be the good guy. I view that he's just this obsessive person who now has everything he wanted. And what does he do with that? It's still the challenge, and you still have crazy 80s related challenges. It's not all video game related. There's like a Prince planet, which is pretty cool. For me, the plot is, if you don't like this book, I'm not going to say you're wrong by any stretch, but I really enjoyed the character side of Wade and how he is not a good person. In 2021, there was No Humans Allowed, Dungeon Academy by Madeleine Roux. This is a kid's book, and it's about the Dungeon Academy, where they teach monsters how to fight D&D adventurers. And this group of ragtag people are trying their best to stop a necromancer. There's a girl who's adopted by 2 minotaurs and pretending to be a minotaur. She's a human. There's an owlbear who is vegan. There's a kobold who thinks he's a dragon. There's a blink dog who just disappears randomly. And then there's a mimic who can only turn into harmless items like a saucepan or a book or a fan. So this group of heroes, group of monsters, end up being heroes. And the art was great, and it was really, really good fun to read. In 2022, there's Almost There by Farah Rochon. This is one of the Disney Twisted Tales series. This is the Tiana one, and I think it's the best one because 1, Tiana's one of my favourite characters. 2, Facilier is probably my favourite villain. But in terms of this book itself, what I really loved was that New Orleans was a character in this. New Orleans even had a character arc. How can a whole town go through a character arc? You'll have to read and find out. 2023, last year, I read In the Shadow of the Wolf Queen by Kieran Millward Hargrave. So Kieran is a close friend, and her books appeared in every year that they were released. Then I was like, okay, I need to mix this up a bit. But I had to get one of her books in, and this was the latest one. The sequel to this book is coming out this year, and I'm incredibly excited to read it. It's a fantasy book, the first in the Geomancer trilogy, and it looks at the magic here is about nature. It's about the main character's sister can listen to trees. There is the physical geography side of the magic is really interesting, and I found the human geography side of the society of the Wolf Queen, who comes in and takes bits from each culture that she invades to create her own new one. So she calls herself Seren because that's a local name rather than a name from her homeland. I think it's an old Welsh name, and it's set in the British Isles, but like fantasy British Isles. And oh my goodness, this book was so good. This book was so good. It's my favourite book that she's ever written, and I can't wait for the sequel. And then for this year, my 36th year on this earth, 2024, I'm going to pick Just Stab Me Now by Jill Bearup, which is a book I read only last month, I think, and it's a fantasy romance where the author then of the book interrupts her characters and tells them that they're making the wrong decisions, and she gets involved, she gets her hands in. So it's the Princess Bride meets Stranger Than Fiction. So those are the 36 books from the 36 years of my life. Next year, when I turn 37, I will probably not do this video again because it's been very, very, very long. Anyway, if you're still here, well done. You can go to bed now and get out of my house.